Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives with the power of psychedelics. In this episode, I had the honor of speaking with Kate Kincaid, a licensed professional counselor who offers ketamine assisted therapy as well as integration services. Kate shares her experiences with psychedelics, starting with the Zendo project at Burning Man, as well as a psychedelic-like near-death experience with childbirth. It's all about non-ordinary states of consciousness. So let's hear from Kate. Kate, thank you so much for coming here on the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm excited to talk to you and learn more about what you have going on with your psychedelic-assisted therapy and some of your own personal stories. So first of all, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm excited to be here too.
Awesome. So yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about, start off with psychedelic-assisted therapy, like what. And you can expand on all your stuff, because I know you have a wide breadth of services you offer. So maybe give an introduction about what you do and how you do it. You want to mention the practice, do that, and then kind of finish up with the psychedelic assisted therapy part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I run a group private practice in Tucson, Arizona called Tucson Counseling Associates. And we mostly right now, we do a lot of things, but we do a lot of psychedelic integration therapy, which is a little different than psychedelic assisted therapy. Integration is more just talking about people's previous experiences that they're either doing on their own or in legal context, and we're just helping them kind of process and make sense of their experiences. But we are currently creating more programming for ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So that would be where they actually are receiving the medicine with the presence of their therapist and talking about what's happening either in real time or immediately after the experience. So that's something we're moving towards.
So the ketamine therapy, I saw somewhere, I think that you do it individually and in groups. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the plan. Mostly right now, individually is what happens. I work with a nurse practitioner who does a lot of, this is like the majority of her practice, and she sits there the whole time with people. And so I've sat in with her, but we're going to do it a little bit different where they get the prescription either from her or somebody else, another prescriber, and they ingest the medicine with their regular talk therapist who will be trained in, non-ordinary states of consciousness and sitting with people as they go through that experience one-on-one. And then we also want to bring groups because I think groups are really powerful for healing.
And is that the group, is that they would actually all together be in that non-ordinary state of consciousness with ketamine together?
Yeah. So, I don't know how much you know about ketamine, but it's very internal. And so there wouldn't really be much talking or interacting during the psychoactive phase of it. But
everybody's not throwing up in the buckets.
Yeah. But immediately after, everybody, can then share where they went and what they saw and how they felt and talk together as a group afterwards.
How long does a ketamine experience last?
It varies. It varies with route and how much you take, but I'd say around 45 minutes.
Oh, okay. That's pretty quick. So
much shorter.
I do know, yeah, it is. It is a lot shorter. It's I know a little bit about ketamine because as a result of having lost our son to suicide, depression, we looked into ketamine therapy as something that we can try to help people get access to. Who are suicidal. We have a family friend who went through it and had remarkable results. But I've also heard there's a difference between the way ketamine gets into the body into how the experience can go. Does it matter if it's eaten or infused or injected?
Yeah, it varies. So the bioavailability differs. So if you're injecting it like intravenously or intramuscular, that's the highest bioavailability. So you need lower doses because almost 100% of the medicine is available to your body. If you there's intranasal or sublingual And if you take either of those routes, you need higher doses because it has to go through the mucous membranes and then it passes through the gut. And so there's a lot lower bioavailability. And people, when it goes through the gut, people have more nausea or uncomfortable, like secondary side effects. Whereas if it goes right into the bloodstream, there's less of that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I was just thinking, people, please don't inject ketamine. I mean, inject ayahuasca. If you're thinking, I don't want to throw up, don't.
No, yeah, totally different.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you said you're going to be offering groups. So really, it's almost like an integration circle, a post-journey integration circle where they all go through it together, and approximately 45 minutes later, they start coming out of it, and then they share their stories and they talk, and maybe you get that group synergy part where they have common experiences, or somebody will say something that piques a little bit of a memory, that, oh yeah, I did have that too, and then they kind of get that benefit.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. One thing I saw, and I'm not questioning you like a news reporter, but you said something like that you believe everyone has the answers to their problems like inside of them. So as a counselor, is and using ketamine and the different methods you have, how do you think psychedelics can help somebody kind of uncover something that they've already got an answer to within them?
It's a good question. I think there's a few different ways that happens. I think that I see that all the time when people talk about their experiences with different psychedelics. There's this feeling of okayness or a feeling of understanding of themselves or the world that they don't have in their normal day-to-day functioning. But when they do go into the non-ordinary state of consciousness through psychedelics, they connect with that feeling of okayness and acceptance. And so there's actually some brain studies that explain why that happens. I don't know, that's not my expertise exactly, but I know that like with the default mode network, it gets quieted, which is kind of, our, default, like our habits of mind, our ways that we get stuck, the patterns of rumination, the like negative beliefs we have about ourselves, like those are all part of the default mode network. And when that kind of goes offline, you reconnect with like a much deeper and like all pervasive like peace and love and understanding, which sounds a little weird.
That's where that comes from, huh?
Yeah. And so it's explained, even with I can't even say it now, fMRIs. They can measure blood flow in the brain, and like that part of the brain is quieter during psychedelic use, And so I think that's why people feel like reconnected to themselves and like they know what they need to do, or they know, who they are and that they're okay when they have these experiences.
And do people ever come to you, because you're talking really integration, because people obviously are not coming in and doing ayahuasca or mushrooms, or, what I mean? They may have been doing it on their own. And then did they come to you after having done something on their own to help work through whatever it is that did come up out of their own quieted DMN?
Yeah. That's we see a lot of people doing that work.
And how do you think, because there's a movement out there. I know the big thing with MAPS is the MDMA assisted psychedelic, therapy, where you've got somebody who's taking MDMA and sitting there with a therapist with them. And you've got the John Hopkins studies where, the terminal cancer patients had psilocybin and had a doctor or a person sitting there next to them going through that. What do you think somebody who has their own journey, maybe goes to South America and does ayahuasca, or, goes, someplace legal, because people don't do anything illegal, goes someplace legal and has these experiences, they come back and talk to you. What do you see as a counselor that has changed, or that they need to work on or work through? Because obviously something big can happen, and they can have insights and they can have experiences that might be scary. But in your experience, when they come to you and sit down and go through a therapy session or an integration session, what are some of the things that you noticed that have either or changed or awakened, or
Mhm.
what's happening with them?
I'd say the most common thing I see, and it just sticks out the most because I just love it every time I hear it, is when people explain that they felt the presence of themselves, or like this like
Hmm.
connection to self, this like deeper, like undamaged core perfect self. I don't There's so
Yeah.
many different words that people use to describe it, that they felt like a direct connection to it, and that's something they don't feel very often, or sometimes ever in their life. They can't remember feeling that. And so I love when people talk about that, and we just try to like anchor that in and like really dig into like what that felt like for them and how they explain what that was. Is
Yeah.
that there all the time for them, but it just gets clouded with some of their patterns of mind.
And some of those patterns of mind, I feel like I noticed that um, even in ceremonies that I participated in, there's a load of trauma in that room.
Yeah.
And so is that kind of part of what's clouding? I mean, do you see trauma as
Oh
a
yeah.
an
Oh yeah.
overwhelmingly common thing out there that people are trying to work through, and they get through it in under that non-ordinary state of consciousness, and they can kind of be themselves without that trauma weighing down on them?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's trauma is such a big thing that it's just like all I think about almost,
Hmm.
or all I see, because it's so pervasive. Like everyone has it, whether you had a one-time huge, we call it big T trauma, or lots of little smaller T traumas. And it doesn't have to be like, almost losing your life or being assaulted or anything like that. Like that, those are traumas, but there can be, just kids that are sensitive and parents that are stressed can lead to like lots of little traumas over time. And
Hmm.
then just living, as an American or in our culture right now is traumatic for most people, and so it's there in everyone. It needs to be acknowledged and processed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what led you to, because normally I shouldn't like the word normal. Quite often you come across somebody who's a licensed professional as counselor,
Uh-huh.
and they may not even know, about psychedelics, right?
Mhm.
I mean, there's some people, I probably have told this story like every single episode, but I don't know. So I have a therapist, and I told her about, my plant medicine use. Her first question to me was, "Are you high right now?"
Oh, wow.
Right. And I don't blame her for it, but there's just a lack of understanding out there.
Uh-huh.
And it turns out now she's actually going through the very early stages of MAPS protocol,
Mm.
and working with some of our local people here in Arizona that you
Mhm.
know by name, that you share
Mhm.
a name with. And so there's, once somebody understands this and they go through there, but so I think it's probably not a norm, right? I mean, to go through your licensing and your work and your classes, I assume there's not a psychedelic therapy class in your course load.
No, there definitely wasn't in my program, no.
So how did you end up here? How did you end up seeing the potential of these medicines and thinking that this was something that you wanted to be a part of?
Well, I heard about maps in the Zendo
Mm-hmm.
project, at Burning Man. So I was at Burning Man, in 2015, and saw it in my book of events happening. And then I think the next year I was going to volunteer to work at the Zendo.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I forget what happened. Something happened. No, it was not the next year, but the year after that I was going to, but then I ended up not going to Burning Man, and so
Mm.
I didn't do it. But that was how I was introduced. And just, yeah, basically reading everything MAPS was doing about, kind of integrating it or bringing it more into the clinical field. And so
Yeah.
I saw an opportunity for my professional life and my personal life, because personally I was interested in plant medicines and doing them recreationally and ceremonially. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't like to blast traditional pharmaceuticals. I know in our world, plant medicine world, entheogen world, whatever, a lot of people like to put up psychedelics and say these are superior to normal pharmacology, whatever. But you had mentioned to me that you had some thoughts about the commercialization and the medicalization of psychedelics and some trends you see coming. So where do you stand on those issues? And maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm asking too many questions at once, but keeping the indigenous ceremonial part, as part of it, making sure it doesn't get too commercialized, understanding the benefits, or maybe you think, yeah, we got to get rid of pharmaceuticals because they're just, all they're doing is damaging people. I mean, I don't really know where you stand, but what are your thoughts on all these things?
Wow, that's such a big,
yeah, sorry. Let's just do one at a time. Pick whatever one you like best.
Yeah. Well, one thought I was having as you were asking that is just, there's kind of a debate. I mean, I don't even know if it's a debate between, like synthetic compounds and like naturally occurring plant medicines. And I think most people who know about all of it understand there's a place for both. And that's how I feel about it. There's a place for both of them. I've heard it described like, if you take like synthetic mescaline versus, like peyote or San Pedro cactus, it's like taking either a glucose tab or eating a brownie, like where the brownie has all these different compounds and chemicals that make it such a rich, like deep experience, where the glucose will affect the body similarly, but it's just this one compound in the whole mix. And so that analogy kind of put it into perspective for me, that it's not going to be the same experience, but it's still a beneficial experience. And one of the things I'm passionate about is conservation. And, these medicines, many of them, they take a long time to grow. It's not sustainable for everyone to be using them as much as they are. And so the synthetic options can help prevent like the plants from being extracted too much or overused. And so I think it's both. Like, I think we need both. So I'm not one or the other. But the medicalization, the thing I'm concerned about with that is just like, with some of these companies, they're trying to patent like these compounds that they're making and then spike the price way up, where like, for example, psilocybin, they grow easily, they grow quickly, it's cheap. But then, in these trials, they've made a synthetic compound that then they're going to patent, and then they can charge a bunch of money for people to use that compound. And so that's a concern. It's just basically when capitalism, sorry, I can't talk today, comes into it, it just gets scary. And so I don't know if that answers the whole question or not, but
yeah, no, it is interesting because there's also, with Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia or whatever his TV show is, he just had an episode about something that's near and dear to you and I, which is the Sonoran Desert toad. And it was very interesting because he came up with a whole synthetic, because he's a chemist, I guess. And he came up with a whole synthetic version of 5-MeO-DMT and presented it to this whole audience, and the whole audience sat there on their hands looking at him like, that's terrible. It has to be natural. And all the practitioners were like, it's natural. And we were like, yeah, but these poor toads, and we've had 3 or 4 really bad monsoon seasons, and they've got to be suffering. And so find a way to conserve the vines in South America. And, you're right. There's just the peyote is a huge problem.
Right.
Yeah. So I think you did answer that. Thank you. I don't know if you have any thoughts. I'm also really into consciousness. And so when somebody says non-ordinary states of consciousness, then my ears perk up and I'm like, well, let's talk about that for an hour.
Yeah, I love talking about that.
Yeah. So when you say non-ordinary states of consciousness, what does that mean to you, and how does that relate to psychedelics, and how does that relate to therapy?
Yeah, I love that term because I feel like it's an umbrella term and psychedelics fit underneath it. But there's
Right.
so many other ways that we experience non-ordinary states of consciousness, and some of them happen, spontaneously, some happen intentionally. And I think it's about empowering people. Like you can achieve these, you can click out of an ordinary state of consciousness or the default mode network yourself anytime in these ways, like with
Yeah.
meditation and breath work. I think that's so empowering to teach people that you don't need a medicine to do that, or you don't need to fly to another country and go through, a whole month of diet. And and that's still, I'm not putting down that at all. I think it's
Right. Right.
amazing, but that's just one way that you can do it, and there's all these other ways. And I think it also validates people's experience. Like there's some people that don't know anything about psychedelics or not interested in psychedelics, but they also have experienced these concepts of non-ordinary states of consciousness, and had the same sort of benefits from it. And so I like talking about that as an umbrella term.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you could also say dreams are a version of it,
Yeah.
or near-death experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Birth. I mean, I just had a baby 15 months ago. I say just because it feels like it was like
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
last week.
congratulations, first of all. Yeah.
But birth, I mean, I'd heard that birth is kind of psychedelic, or it's definitely you're in an altered state of consciousness, but I didn't know until I'd done it, and it was definitely a non-ordinary state of consciousness that I'm still processing and integrating. Um, and my birth
Wow.
also actually turned into a near-death experience too. So it was like both birth and death in one.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
No, thank you, but I'm not sorry. It was amazing. It's like it's scary. It was trauma, but it was so meaningful and so interesting and taught me so much and like changed my life.
Yeah.
I love it.
Do you want to share anything from it? I don't know
Sure.
if you want to do a whole trip report or if you just want to share some highlights, but do you want to kind of talk
Yeah.
about what happened in the non-ordinary states of consciousness and the near-death part?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think of how to share or what to share, but
Because
yeah.
interesting, I follow the late Ram Dass and the philosophy of, be here now.
Hmm.
And one of the things that he talked about was snapping out of like this reality.
Hmm.
And obviously, he was a big user of LSD that really helped him in the early days. But
Hmm.
he lists in his book all these ways that you can snap out of this reality and experience an alternate reality, what we might call a non-ordinary state of consciousness.
Hmm.
And childbirth was one of them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So you went through something I'll never understand.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was reading, I like Ina May Gaskin. I don't know if you know her, but she's a midwife. So I was
Hmm.
reading her book, in the weeks before my birth, and she was talking about like different brain waves and different states of the labor and where your brain waves you can drop. I don't know them, but it's like theta, you get into theta or beta, or you go down as you're going into as you get closer to delivering. And so I was already kind of expecting something to be happening with my brain waves, and I was listening to music that was supposed to like help drop you into those zones. And so I was already kind of playing with consciousness, before I even went into it. But it did feel like, just like taking a psychedelic, like once you have it in your body, you're kind of on the trip, like my body took over for the birth, and I was just trying to keep up, or I was just trying to like accept and surrender, but I did not feel like I was in control for much of it. It felt like something else, whatever it
Yeah.
was in control. Where, if you take the medicine, then you can point to the medicine taking you on a trip, or the spirit of the medicine taking you on a trip. So with birth, I don't know if it's my body or the baby coming or what it was that was guiding the trip, but it was definitely a trip.
Wow, it sounds like a trip. It sounds like you prepare your setting,
Uh-huh.
and then you just let go.
Yeah. Tried.
Tried.
I
Yeah.
tried. It was so hard because I mean, and I even have a lot of experience with psychedelics, and so I'm used to like, oh, this is not going how I planned, and oh, but I have to surrender right now. I had practice in
Yeah.
that, but I felt like birth was like next level for somebody
Wow.
who already had practiced that, or at least my birth was that, and that particular birth. Because I also, I don't, I think I've worked with my issues of control, but like one of the things I was trying to do with my birth was trying to like read everything and like plan for everything. And I was going to do a home birth. And so I had, the room was set up like a month before the baby was even due. And like I just was just doing a lot of preparation to ease my anxiety about knowing I was going into this ordeal that I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't have a lot of control over. And I was envisioning like a quiet, calm birth where I'm just, breathing through each contraction. And I was even writing like my vision for it and just like trying to like make it so. But my birth was like the complete opposite of that. But it was so healing in that way because it just kind of blew some of that preparation out. Like, I'm not saying preparation isn't important, but like surrender, for me at least, is so much more important.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do all the prep you want, but when you get into the ordeal, like you really don't know exactly how it's going to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then it sounds exactly like it, like a psychedelic
Mhm.
trip. And then so then something went wrong.
Yeah, so my blood pressure spiked, or I had it had been creeping up the last like couple weeks before my due date. Um, and so I went to see my midwife, my home birth midwife, and my blood pressure was really high and I had a headache and she thought maybe I had preeclampsia. So she wanted me
Hmm.
to go to the hospital to be tested. Um, and so I didn't even have a bag packed. So it was the day before my due date. So like I was just so set on having a home birth that I didn't even consider packing a hospital bag. And
Yeah.
so I just like threw some things in a bag and went, and I was like for sure going to leave. I was going to get this test and then I was going to go back home and have my baby. But when I got there, my blood pressure was so high. They're like, no, you're not, you're having your baby now or tonight. And
Mm.
you're not leaving here until you've had your baby, basically. So that was really hard. I was just like having to surrender already, like, just being
Yeah.
off my birth plan. And I had such a sweet midwife who I used to work with, because I used to work in primary care as a mental health person. And
Oh.
so I actually knew this midwife, and she was just like holding me while I was crying because I was just like
Mm.
feeling the grief already of like being off my plan. And I just like, I have a lot of anxiety anyways. And so being off my plan was like really hard and scary. And she said something like, everyone has three births: the one they plan for, the one they have, and then the one they tell about. And she's like,
Mm.
and you're on your second one right now because you're not
Wow.
having the birth you planned. And so that was just kind of helpful too.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it was. But I was also really set on having a non-medicated birth because I wanted to have an ordeal. I wanted to be initiated, is some of the words I was using. I was like, I want to feel everything. I want to like remember everything. Even though that's not true either. I don't remember a lot of things because it's just so intense. Like you're just in another world. Like once I come back to this world, I don't remember where I was. Um, but so I was pushing really hard for no Pitocin, which is the drug that
Hmm.
helps stimulate contractions. So I refused that and was just waiting to go into labor myself. And we waited all night and nothing really happened. They just kept monitoring my blood pressure. And then at like 6 a.m, I went from like totally fine, barely feeling contractions to like contraction on top of contraction. Like
Mm.
there's a monitor, and I also have a weird thing with numbers. So it was December 12th and I was due on the 13th. And there was 12 of us in the labor unit that night. And so and
Mm.
I could see everybody's contractions. They had it all on the screen, and everyone's was so like, they had like a minute in between, and it was like nice, even peaks. And then I saw mine
Yeah.
and it looked like a mountain range. Like it was just like so jagged and like one on top of another. And like I
Well, that'll
couldn't,
stress you out.
yeah, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't catch my breath because as soon as it was starting to pass and I would like try to take a breath, then the next contraction would happen. And so it was just like really frenetic and like all over the place and really overwhelming. And another thing about me is I'm pretty quiet, or I don't want to like make too much noise or take up too much space. But I was like screaming at the top of my lungs and like making all kinds of sounds and just like flopping around. And like everybody, I had two of my best friends and my partner there with me, and they were all like helping hold me up because I was just like not even able to like hold my body up. So it was really healing for me because it was so different than my default. You know, it felt like I just kind of like burst through some like barriers that I always have on myself. So it's just like same with like Burning Man. They say you don't get the burn you want, you get the burn you need. It's kind of the same with birth. I think like you don't get the birth that you want, you get the birth that you need. And I that's something I've like telling myself as I'm processing this. Like I got this complete opposite birth than I wanted, but it was like exactly what I needed.
And that is like psychedelics. You go into
Yeah.
it, I've been in ceremonies where they're like, okay, set an intention. And then you do that, and the psychedelics are like, nope, that's not what we're going to be working on.
Exactly. It's like, no, this is the medicine that you need. You need to
Yeah.
scream and you need to flop around and like not worry about farting or pooping on everyone and just like
Yeah.
do your thing, which is like if somebody had described my birth to me before that birth, I would have been so terrified.
Yeah.
I would have been like, I can't do it. I'm not doing that. But it was so amazing because I did not care in the moment. I was just like, this is what I have to do.
Yes. Yeah. It changes the perspective. And like you said, you're in a different state of consciousness.
Right. Right. Yeah. So that was all beautiful. And then the baby came and he was good. And we had this like half hour of like the golden hour, whatever, everything was perfect. And then the near death experience came afterwards. So I hadn't peed or hadn't got up to pee. And she's like, you're going to have to get up to pee or I'm going to have to put a catheter in. And I was just like, what? And so I like got up to go pee. And like so much blood came out. Like I had been hemorrhaging actually.
Yeah.
And we didn't know, and I didn't feel it. I felt great. I was just like laying down, holding my baby, and none of us knew until I got up. And then things turned like pretty quickly, and they had to like they looked inside, and there was like a lot of internal tearing. There was like so. Anyways, this might be too much information, but
No,
that's where the blood was coming from. Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we had to get the surgeon in, and then I had to get an epidural, which I really didn't want an epidural for the birth. And I was kind of fighting it even then. I was like, no, I don't want any drugs. And it's funny because my two best friends are people that I do a lot of psychedelics with, and they're like, Kate, you love drugs. Like, just take the drugs. And I was just like, okay, I guess I'll take the drugs. And so because I was also getting worked up because I was like, it was stressful. There was like a surgeon there and they were trying to do an epidural. And so they gave me something to calm me down and then did the epidural and took me to the OR for like to set me up. But I think it was like in the ORs where I feel like I was the closest to death. Like I could hear my heartbeat slowing down, and it actually wasn't scary at all. It felt like peaceful and like calming. And I felt like this is like a choice point. Like I can let go and like trust that maybe they'll bring me back if my heart stops. Like I know that these people know how to do that and that's their job. And there was like 10 people in the OR. And so I'm not alone. I'm here with people, but I also didn't want to take that chance because I literally just had a baby like down the hall who I needed to get back to. And so, and so I did some like fire breathing to like try to speed my own heart rate up and like stay alive basically. Or that's in my mind, that's what I was doing. I don't know if that's really what was happening or not. I had lost a lot of blood. And so I was kind of in and out of consciousness. But when I was conscious, that's what I was thinking. And so I was trying to like breathe quickly and fast and like talk to the anesthesiologist, who was the only person on the other side of the veil with me. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I describe it, as like near death. It felt like a very easy, I don't want to say easy, but it just felt like it could easily have gone either way. And it felt like a choice. And I felt sure of my choice to be here. But then it was a trip, because afterwards I felt like I was so aware. And even now I'm still so aware of how close we are to death all the time, and how effortless sometimes a choice like that can be. Like it's peaceful, kind of. When I was so close to that point, it felt like I could have peacefully gone either way. I don't know.
Wow. And so how does that change your outlook on life? Because I never even thought about that until you just said it, how close we always are to death. We're really, a heartbeat away is what they say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did that affect, and I want to kind of two-step this, how has that affected your life and changed that? And you had mentioned that part of this was processing this and integrating this, just like one would do with a psychedelic experience. So, how has it changed your life, from this experience? And then maybe start talking about what is integration.
Yeah. I think it's changed my life. It's renewed my sense of wanting to be here, or like, okay, so I made this choice, and every day I'm making this choice, like I'm not on the OR table anymore, but like if it is that close all the time, every day I'm choosing not to go there. And so why, and what am I doing? And like, am I living the life that I want to be living, so that I am choosing to be here for myself or my son or my other people in my life? And so it's just kind of like, it's just more present, the choice to be here, and the choice to like live my life the way that I want to, or the way that I'm proud of, or the way that has meaning for me.
Yeah. Awesome. That's beautiful.
Thanks.
So when somebody has, a psychedelic experience, they come to you and work with you. What is the key to integrating that experience? And what is integration? I mean, when we say we're going to do integration, or you've had this experience, I need to help you integrate it. What does that mean, to integrate it?
I think it means to make it real, or to like live it, to turn it into action, or to bring it like down to earth, kind of, or to bring it into earth, instead of wherever you were in the cosmos, or like these big insights. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean for your life, and how are you going to live differently, or what actions does that mean you need to take? And I don't want to push people to like figure that out quickly. Like, I think integration is actually a lot longer. It can be years, that people are processing a big experience. So they don't have to figure that out now, but that's the constant question of just like, how do you bring this into life, and how are you different because of it, and how are you acting differently?
Is there a danger in rushing it? Because I hear, and I'm not trying to slam anything I see out there in the internet world, right? But you see a lot of integration circles that people will have a ceremony or an individual experience, and then a week or two later, they're having this big integration circle. Is it possible that that doing it too quickly can also kind of override
I
some of
think
those
so. Yeah,
experiences?
I definitely think so. Especially like trying to put words to it too quickly. I don't know if I'd say it's dangerous, but it just misses the point. Like, a lot of this is pre-verbal, or beyond words, and using language that's just like a specific part of our brain that we're trying to bring in, and like it's just so limiting. And so even being able to talk about it too soon, I think, is not necessarily a good thing. And so just letting people have their time, like maybe they want to write their own words and not worry about how it sounds or if it's making sense, that's fine. But yeah, I think not pressuring yourself or others to explain it with words.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because I've had like a post-ceremony experience where I sit around, everybody's talking and using words, and I'm just like, wow, I don't have these words.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can't do this, and I start feeling like, well, maybe I didn't have a good experience. Maybe my experience wasn't right. You know, or maybe my experience was light, or just, whatever. Something was wrong with my experience. And then later, things start, kind of starts coming together, and then I can sit down and bang out a journal entry or something like that, where it kind of clicks in my mind.
Yeah.
And it may not be a whole lot later. It could be a couple of days.
Right.
But right after the ceremony, sitting there, everybody talking, I'm just like, well, I'm not ready. I'm still not, I still don't understand what happened.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah, definitely just taking your time with the words about it. And I think like integration groups, I've talked with some other people about, one way to do it is just to be together. You don't necessarily have to talk about it. Like there's a group I know that does like walking meditation. So like they've all had either an experience together or separately, but then they get together and they are together, but they're not talking about what happened. And that's integration, just being in the presence of others who are on a similar journey, thinking about whatever they're thinking about together, but separately,
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Another tool I like to use with people is like if art, if you like to draw or paint, but I definitely don't like to draw or paint, but doing a vision board, like where you just cut things out of a magazine. So it's just more like symbols or images instead of words that kind of can tap into helping you make sense of an experience without having to use that part of your brain that like needs to name it or label it with a word,
That's a great idea. Yeah, because so many people are visual. I was just talking to a friend of mine today, and I was telling her I see things more in like graphs and charts, like a flow of connected things, as opposed to like an image of something or words. That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
So the last question I have for you, just kind of a general question, is, and then the actual last question is, what else have I not asked you? What else do you want to share? But my last official question for you is the notion of a stigma around psychedelics. So when you tell somebody that you are, a psychedelic integration therapist, or psychedelic-assisted therapy, or psychedelic therapy, psychedelic whatever, a user of psychedelics, out on the playa, nobody's going to question you, right? But when you get back into the default world and people are like, oh, what do you do? It's like, oh, I'm a therapist, I'm a counselor, and I work with ketamine, psychedelics. Do you ever get negative reactions? Do you ever get echoes of the stigmas that are out there around these topics?
I think I'm in a little bit of a bubble because I don't. I think, just the therapists I surround myself with, and a lot of my friends are therapists, and they're all doing the same things, and so I don't really feel that much. But I am in a larger therapist networking group. There's like 300 of us, and I posted a talk I was doing at a conference about psychedelics, and there was a couple comments of like, these are scheduled drugs, and and I just kind of cited some articles about what's happening. Like they just clearly did not know what's happening in the field. And they should know, as a licensed clinician, they should know what's happening in the field. And so I just saw it as an opportunity to educate. But so it's really rare, but I think I'm in a little bit of a bubble down here in Tucson and with my friends.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, the bubble part, maybe it sounds like it's contained, but I don't think that's the case. I think you're out there talking about it and spreading the word. So you're surrounded by good people, but I don't think you're in a bubble. I think the word is getting out.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know when I went, there was an Arizona psychedelic conference in 2018 or 19 up here in Phoenix.
Yeah. I went to that.
Oh, awesome. Maybe that is where
we met.
Yeah. Maybe that is where we met, because I just remember being at that conference and meeting so many people from the clinical and psychological and medical community.
Uh-huh.
And I just thought, oh, this is going to be a bunch of psychonauts, right? We're all coming here to talk about our trips and learn stuff. And I felt like every single session, there was a professional like you sitting next to me. And I just, even for me, I was like, oh, wow. So what are you doing here? And so even then I didn't have it. That stigma was still kind of rattling around inside my brain. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, Kate. So what have I not asked you? Is there anything else you wanted to get out there that I didn't ask you, or anything that we need to button up?
I can't think of anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm really glad that we connected on this and the stuff you shared, especially the non-ordinary states of consciousness, which always gets me going. But I really appreciate your knowledge and your wisdom on all this stuff, and just to really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening, and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.